The past 12 hours have seen developments so critical they could reshape the course of the war. On one hand, missiles are still being launched. On the other, there are claims that behind-the-scenes negotiations are underway. So how can both of these realities exist at the same time? Let's start from the top. Recent statements out of Washington suggest a new turning point in the war. U.S. President Donald Trump announced that contact has been established with Iran and that talks have begun with the right people. He even hinted that a plan may already be on the table. But what's happening on the ground tells a very different story. At the same time, the Pentagon is preparing to send thousands of additional troops to the Middle East. According to reports, the U.S. Department of Defense is expected to deploy 3,000 soldiers from the Army's 82nd Airborne Division to support operations involving Iran within hours. What does that mean? It means that while the United States says peace is negotiable, it's also preparing for the war to escalate even further. Diplomacy and escalation are moving forward at the same time, and the situation on the Iranian front is even more intense. Tehran has shown no signs of backing down in its latest statements. In fact, it has taken a harder stance, making negotiations even more difficult. Shortly after, new missile strikes followed. Iran launched another barrage toward Israel. Air defense systems were activated. The sky lit up once again. Let's be clear, there is no ceasefire, no slowdown. The war continues at full intensity. But the most critical front right now is at sea, specifically the Strait of Hormuz. In the last 12 hours, Iran sent a significant message. Tehran said it would allow non-hostile ships to pass through the strait. At first glance, that sounds like a step back. But the reality is very different. Global data shows that the flow of liquefied natural gas through the strait has nearly come to a halt. In other words, Iran may be allowing passage, but no one is willing to risk crossing that dangerous corridor. This reveals the most dangerous consequence of the war, an energy shock. According to recent analyses, this crisis is hitting the natural gas market even harder than oil prices. In particular, pressure on LNG routes coming out of Qatar poses a much greater threat to Europe and Asia. Markets are volatile. Investors are cautious. No one knows where this war is heading, and perhaps most striking of all, world leaders are now openly concerned. The Pope warned that the war is getting worse. International circles believe the situation is slipping out of control. Because this is no longer just a military conflict, it has become a multifaceted crisis targeting energy supply lines, global trade, diplomatic balances, and even internal stability within nations. All of it can be summed up in one sentence. Talks may be starting, but the war is far from over. In fact, it may be entering its most dangerous phase yet. At the same time, reports from Europe suggest that the Iranian regime is facing serious internal trouble. Protests have intensified. A powerful symbolic moment occurred when the lion and sun flag, representing Iran's historical authority, was raised at the Iranian embassy in Copenhagen, Denmark. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Japan announced preparations to ensure safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. What was once Iran's greatest bargaining tool has now become a liability. When Iran effectively closed the strait, around 400 massive cargo ships were left stranded off the coast of Oman. Within days, global oil prices surged, Europe's energy supply lines were disrupted, and major economies were pushed to their limits. But Tehran's strategic gamble backfired. In an unprecedented move, 22 major nations signed a joint military declaration to end the chaos in energy markets. They agreed to deploy warships, mine-clearing fleets, and air patrols directly into the Strait of Hormuz. This fundamentally changes the nature of the war. So how did things escalate so quickly? Previously, NATO had firmly refused to get involved. But now, a coalition of 22 countries, mostly NATO members, along with Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, the UAE, and Bahrain, has come together to ensure the strait remains open. The United States had initially tried to handle this operation largely on its own, with limited support from Israel and Gulf allies. That changed when Iran made what many consider a critical mistake. According to reports, Iran struck a massive LNG facility, causing an estimated $20 billion in damage. In Europe, natural gas prices jumped 35% overnight. Japan's crude oil imports were nearly cut off entirely. Suddenly, countries that once said, "This isn't our war," realized the consequences were hitting their own economies. By March 19th, panic buttons were being pressed in capitals across Europe and Asia. The UK, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Japan issued a joint statement condemning Iran's attacks, pledging action to stabilize energy markets, and expressing readiness to ensure safe passage through the strait. That same day, the statement expanded into a massive global military coalition. A total of 22 countries, led by the United States, agreed to a joint military operation. This hybrid force will deploy naval assets, underwater defense systems, and autonomous vehicles directly into the waters of the Strait of Hormuz. Behind this coalition is intense pressure from Washington. During a meeting in the Oval Office with Japan's Prime Minister, Trump pushed for direct military support. He even referenced Pearl Harbor as a reminder of the dangers of surprise attacks, a message that clearly signaled to allies that staying on the sidelines was no longer an option. So how will this coalition operate? The plan has 4 stages. First, mine clearance. The coalition will launch a large-scale operation using minesweepers, unmanned underwater vehicles, and specialized helicopters. This process could take weeks or even months, but just beginning it would already help stabilize markets. Second, escorting oil tankers. Similar to the 1987 Operation Earnest Will, naval forces from 22 countries will patrol and protect shipping routes, reducing the burden currently carried by the United States alone. Third, air patrol and coastal surveillance. A multi-layered monitoring network will track Iran's coastal missile systems, drone launch sites, and fast boat movements in real time, making hit-and-run tactics far more difficult. Fourth, targeted strikes on Iran's coastal attack capabilities. Coalition air forces, working with U.S. aircraft carriers, will strike missile batteries, drone bases, and fast boat shelters along the coastline. This means clearing the strait not just of mines, but of Iran's ability to threaten it. Meanwhile, the pressure continues to build. A third U.S. aircraft carrier is on the way. 2,500 Marines are being deployed to the region. Even a possible ground operation targeting key islands is being discussed. There's also an economic dimension to all of this. The International Energy Agency has released 400 million barrels from strategic reserves. Coalition countries are urging oil producers to increase output. Saudi Arabia's East-West pipeline is operating at full capacity. The goal is clear: push oil prices below $100 per barrel and completely undermine Iran's strategy of triggering a global energy crisis. Once this international fleet is fully deployed in the Strait of Hormuz, Iran's much-touted asymmetric naval doctrine could collapse entirely. The Revolutionary Guard Navy is effectively trapped in its own waters. Its mining capacity has been reduced by 90%, and it has already lost more than 130 vessels. Despite threats to sink enemy ships, those warnings are rapidly losing credibility in the face of an overwhelming air defense umbrella and advanced naval systems deployed by 22 nations. The multinational force is effectively breaking the blockade and neutralizing Iran's ability to choke global oil supply. But the military pressure is only one side of the crisis. Behind the scenes, Iran is facing a growing wave of diplomatic and financial isolation. A campaign led by Israel's foreign minister has pushed more than 33 countries to officially designate Iran's Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization. This move is dismantling the group's financial networks, shell companies, and logistics channels across Europe and the Balkans. Bank accounts are being frozen, business visas revoked, and suspicious shipments halted. Doing business with Iran is now considered too risky for global companies. By shutting down the strait and losing oil revenue, Tehran has also cut off its own access to foreign currency. This financial chokehold is triggering serious internal instability. The social contract between the state and its people, built on promises of stability and prosperity, is breaking down. In major cities, shortages of basic food and clean water are fueling unrest that's becoming increasingly difficult to control. At the same time, elites and high-ranking officials are reportedly trying to move their wealth out of the country, exposing deep internal corruption. On the global stage, Iran's strategic miscalculation is becoming clear. Key allies like China and Russia have remained largely silent. China, heavily dependent on Iranian oil, is avoiding direct confrontation with the US-led coalition. Instead, it's relying on complex shipping routes and temporary exemptions. Russia, while benefiting from higher oil prices, is tied down by the war in Ukraine and unable to provide meaningful support in the Gulf. Even traditional allies like Syria and North Korea have remained quiet. Meanwhile, major regional players, including Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and the United Arab Emirates, have aligned with the coalition. This is no longer just a conflict between the US and Iran. It's a broader confrontation between Iran and the stability of the entire region. The world is witnessing the emergence of a new global order as Iran becomes increasingly isolated. Military analysts say that against a coalition of this scale, Iran's chances of survival in a conventional conflict are extremely low. Its aging ships and fast attack boats would be quickly overwhelmed by advanced air and naval power. That leaves Tehran with only a few asymmetric options. One is covert mining operations using small submarines and disguised vessels. Another is launching surprise missile attacks from hidden positions along its rugged coastline. The third is expanding the conflict through regional proxies, such as directing Houthi forces in Yemen to target shipping routes in the Red Sea. But none of these options are enough to defeat the coalition. Instead, the goal appears to be raising costs, targeting a tanker or minesweeper to drive insurance rates sky high and create panic in global markets. It's a high-risk strategy that leans more toward disruption than victory. In the end, this entire situation reflects a massive geopolitical miscalculation. By attempting to choke off the Strait of Hormuz, Iran may have triggered the very collapse it sought to avoid, cutting itself off from global markets and destroying its own economic lifelines.